They are Raycon earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. "America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles." Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from his marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrast. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in sum, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. "This American carnage stops right here and stops right now," said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. That was some weird S-word, former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. Cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. In our second hour, we're going to get into the question of who's going to win, the bullies or the nerds. And Dr. Howard Koh of Harvard is going to drop by. He's advising Biden on the health crisis. We'll get into that. Barry Lynn is going to drop by and talk about monopoly and China's integration into the U.S. economy. And how does that, TikTok actually is kind of the hook for all this. How does that affect American security? But I want to start the program today by asking the simple question, will enough Americans show up this fall that we can push through all the various forms of voter suppression, including messing with the mails, and disinformation that Donald Trump is promoting? Will enough Americans show up to stop Trump from using the dictator's playbook? This is really an important point, and it's a point that Rachel Maddow made on her show last night, and it was the first time I'd heard it in the national press. I just finished writing this book about oligarchy and tyranny, and it's front and center there. But I had not seen. I'd been kind of waiting for. But I had not seen anybody in the corporate press talk about this. And now one show has. We'll see if others do. But here it is. The single most consistent defining characteristic of an emerging dictatorship in a country that started as a democracy is that the dictator actually holds elections and typically wins them. In fact, always wins them. That's why he's the dictator. And the way that the dictator, and I'm using the word he because I don't know of any female dictators who have done this, And the way that he does this is by seizing control of the instruments of government that can help him win the election. Not because people love him, but because basically they end up having no choice. I mean, Donald Trump has done this now with the Justice Department, the Post Office, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Federal Reserve, and our intelligence agencies. None of this has ever happened before. This is arguably a massive violation of the Hatch Act, which says you can't use federal resources for election purposes. And, you know, they've been violating the Hatch Act forever. From Kellyanne Conway pitching Ivanka's stuff in front of the White House logo, to Donald Trump putting Goya products all over his desk, his daughter Ivanka, doing a photo shoot with Goya products and tweeting. I mean, all this kind of stuff. This is all deeply, profoundly illegal, but, Trump is like pushing it in our face, like, screw you people. We don't care about the law. We don't care about democracy. We only care about power. Over at the Justice Department, Attorney General Bill Barr has said that he intends to investigate Joe Biden. In fact, he's doing it right now, the John Durham investigation, and Joe Biden and his son's activities in Ukraine, and that, maybe just before the election we'll release all this information. Trump has seized control of the post office. He's just over the weekend, on Friday, decapitated its senior management and has already begun slowing down the mail. People all over the country are complaining that their packages are arriving late. Hell, I sent a couple of books to a friend of mine in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago via priority mail, and they have not arrived yet. He is slowing down the mail. He's more than doubling the cost for states to send out mail-in ballots. He's telling the states you can no longer mail these things bulk rate, third-class mail. You have to mail them first-class mail. So the price goes from roughly 20 cents to a little over 50 cents. He's gotten the Department of Homeland Security and various factions within their immigration police to challenge protesters for a test run here in Portland, and plans to bring that crew to other cities just in time for a massive display of police power during the elections. Trump has directed all reporting on coronavirus statistics away from the Centers for Disease Control and into HHS, an agency run by his toady, Alex Azar. Now hospitals and public health officials, as well as news agencies, can no longer get accurate data on the severity of the pandemic in the United States. Over at the Fed, Trump has installed Jerome Powell, a multimillionaire banker who is not an economist and was on the board of the Carlyle Group. Powell has created about $7 trillion out of thin air and is using it to buy corporate stocks and bonds to maintain the stock market, something we've talked about on this program a lot, making it appear that the economy is nowhere near as bad as it is. And when our intelligence agencies first reported that Russia, the source of much of Trump's wealth, according to his own children, was already actively interfering in the 2020 elections, Trump got them to change their assessment to downplay Russia and highlight that China and Iran had a, quote, preference for Biden. He got the intelligence agency to admit the fact that China and Iran are not engaged in active measures, creating the false impression that there was some sort of balance among foreign actors messing with our elections. On top of this, this is where it explodes from the realm of obscene to the realm of, God, I'm lacking adjectives. In a further tip of the hat to his white racist supporters, Donald Trump wants to declare his candidacy for president, for re-election, while simultaneously symbolically declaring that the Confederacy won at Gettysburg. Gettysburg, you will recall, was referred to by the federal government's website for Gettysburg. Says it was, quote, often referred to as the high watermark of the rebellion. Gettysburg was the Civil War's single bloodiest battle. Now, the South lost at Gettysburg, but Trump wants to go there and proclaim his candidacy, I think, to essentially say to white racists in America, which day by day I'm discovering to my horror is a larger fraction of white people than I ever imagined, that basically he's reversing the Confederacy's loss at Gettysburg. I mean, there were one of the points that I make in my new book on oligarchy is that the South lost the Civil War but won the peace. And, that's essentially what Donald Trump is ratifying, is certifying. And all of these actions, if you add these all up, no president has ever done these things, right? No president has ever used the Department of Homeland Security or any of our federal police agencies to help his reelection. No president has ever used the Department of Health and Human Services to help him win re-election. No president has ever used the post office or messed with the post office to help him win election. No president has ever manipulated the Federal Reserve to help win an election. No president has ever manipulated our intelligence agencies to win an election. I mean, the closest you can get to that was Nixon back during the '72 election. And I'm doing this from memory. I can't find documentation on it, but my recollection is that he was making it harder for reporters in Vietnam to do their job. And that was around the time that Walter Cronkite was pulling his hair out. But that pales in comparison to what Trump is doing. So you add all this stuff up, and it becomes fairly clear that Donald Trump doesn't think that he's president of the United States. He believes that he's a tin pot dictator of a third world country. He's been governing that way for 3.5 years, and now he's campaigning that way. And the question that we're confronting over the next 6 months, between now and January 20th, when the new president should be taking place, or when Trump's presidency officially ends, is whether Trump has taken America so far down this road of oligarchy and tyranny and despotism and fascism, essentially, that we can't recover. I mean, it's going to take tens of millions of us showing up, speaking out, and making sure our votes are counted to stop this train wreck before it utterly destroys the American experiment. And, I mean, there's still months to go. There's still a month or so to go before early voting starts. And we've got all this stuff in place. What more is Donald Trump going to do? What more are the fascists in the Republican Party willing to do? I don't have the answer to that. Obviously time will tell. My opinion is that we can still stop this and turn it back if we overwhelmingly show up in the elections, and I think that there's some indications we're going to. But will our ballots be counted? I mean, are we seeing America turn into Uzbekistan?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's on your mind today?
Tom, thank you so much for taking my call, and good day to your teammates, and hope they're all well. Tom, are we going to know who's won the presidency the same night or the next day?
No, probably not. Probably it'll take, a week or two. And the big fear that, media watchers are expressing is that on election night, we won't have a final winner, but the trend lines, because those will be the states that will be reporting instantly on election night, will be the red states that are blocking mail-in voting. And those will be states that Trump has won. So there will be a number of Trump victories that will be reported election night. And then it'll take a week or so for all the ballots to be counted. It could even take longer than that in a lot of the other states. And during that time, Trump is going to be every single day saying, I won, I won, I won. I mean, we're going to see a replay, in my opinion, of the 2000 election with the Brooks Brothers riot and all that kind of stuff. I mean, don't forget, the big news networks called Florida for Al Gore based on exit polling and based on the numbers that they were looking at. And it turns out when the New York Times and the Washington Post actually counted all the ballots a year later, and they released this a month after 9/11, so they kind of toned it down. But basically what they found was that by any way of counting the ballots, Al Gore won Florida. So, the election was stolen, unambiguously stolen in that time. So, I just think he's going to try and repeat that. And who was involved in that, who was down there in Florida and who was helping out with the Brooks Brothers riots and who was also helping write the draft for the Bush v. Gore thing was Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and John Roberts. John Kavanaugh and John Roberts. And, George W. Bush rewarded Roberts by putting him on the Supreme Court, and Donald Trump rewarded Kavanaugh. Yeah, he's a good soldier. He's done this before. Omar, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Dion in Chicago. Hey, Dion, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what the farmer donors in the Trump administration has to gain up until now into election season. I saw that some of the top donors are heavily invested in hydrochloroquine, like Novitrust, Teva, and Bayer.
Mm-hmm. So so what's your point, Dion?
So I think it's possible that Trump is going to try to get this approved by election season, and then he's going to be hailed as the savior for COVID-19, and then the celebration ribbons come down.
Yeah. I think he's going to try and, he's already tried that with hydrochloroquine, and he, by the way, 3 of the Trump family trusts or whatever were heavily invested in, what is it, Sinovel, the French company that makes hydrochloroquine?
Yeah.
Sinofil, whatever. I'm doing that from memory, but the, I think that moment has passed. My guess is that what we will see is something like what Russia is doing right now, which is saying we've got a vaccine, we haven't tested it on a large number of people for safety or efficacy, but what the hell, we're going to roll it out right now. And that Trump is going to lean on the Food and Drug Administration to approve a vaccine that may be kind of sketchy and may cause a lot of death and a lot. I mean, this happened during Jerry Ford's presidency. We had a flu virus that looked like it was going to be really nasty. They rolled out a vaccine for it, and the vaccine we didn't discover until it was almost 6 months to a year later that we started noticing. The epidemiologists started noticing that large numbers of people were getting a neurological disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome, as I recall. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmannReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmannReport.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these 2 great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It is getting very, very strange out there. For example, there is one of Trump's super PACs, it's called America First Action, has launched a website that looks like a news website. It's called the American Herald, and they claim that, they are a news website. It's American-Herald.com if you want to check it out. And now, I'm not trying to promote it. I don't think most of our listeners and viewers are going to be living over there, but you can just see what's going on here. And this news platform now is being used to position, quote, news stories that can be pushed into social media, particularly Facebook. News stories that make it look like, Trump is the savior of America and everybody else is evil. It's pretty breathtaking. And they have spent tens of millions of dollars on the presidential's on Trump's re-election campaign so far. This is frankly, I think, an ominous sign. He's got much of the media cowed, and where he doesn't have the media cowed, he's creating his own media. Basically, what would you call it? State-run media? Meanwhile, we're seeing, assaults here in Portland The allegation, they haven't confirmed it, so the guy's name hasn't been released, but the allegation is that there's a local right-winger who's a former Navy SEAL who threw an IED at anti-Trump protesters last night in Portland. And, an improvised explosive device, a pipe bomb. It's breathtaking what's going on. And not being condemned from the White House or by anybody, any consequential Republican. Meanwhile, over in New Zealand, yesterday I reported that they had gone 100 days without a new case of coronavirus. They had 23 active cases in the entire nation. All of them were in quarantine, and to the best of their knowledge, all of them had been people who got off planes from other countries in the last few months, the last 3 months. Well, the good news ended last night. Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, announced that one family, one household, just tested positive, 3 people in that household in New Zealand. So they had gone 102 days without a single new case, and the entire nation. This could be us, by the way, if we had taken this as seriously back in January as New Zealand did. This could be us. New Zealanders are going to soccer matches and filling the stands. New Zealanders the bars and restaurants are fully open. The economy is back to normal, by and large, in New Zealand. Has been for months. But yesterday they announced that this one family had 3 coronavirus cases. So after 3 months, they've got one family with 3 cases. They have no idea how this family got this virus. They have not been traveling. They have locked down most of the country for the next 3 days until they figure out where the hell this virus came from so that they can do something about it. Now, that's a country that cares about its people. Here in the United States, we were sort of moving in that direction until April 7th. Back in the last weeks of March and the first week of April, Jared Kushner and his buddies in the White House actually had come up with a federal plan using federal dollars to test people, to push out testing equipment, to use the Defense Production Act to require the manufacture of testing kits, to get masks out to everyone. I mean, there was going to be a strong federal response to this. It was based in large part on the old handbook that the Obama administration left. And then came April 7th, and on April 7th, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all the news agencies all across America reported for the very first time that the majority of deaths were happening among African Americans and Hispanics. And at that moment, at that point, as Vanity Fair has revealed in detail, Donald Trump and Jared Kushner and their buddies apparently sat down in the White House and said, hey, this is just killing black people, and it's only happening in blue states with Democratic governors and cities with Democratic mayors. Why are we trying to do anything about this? Let's just let it destroy them. This will work to our benefit politically. And thus, the entire program, the entire federal program in the United States to do something about this got deep-sixed, got killed. And to this day, we've got, no federal program. We don't even have good federal reporting. The hospitals used to report their statistics to the Centers for Disease Control. This goes back to the 1950s. Trump said, no, you're going to report it to Health and Human Services, and Health and Human Services isn't even going to handle it. I got a billionaire buddy. He's got a company, a data company. They're going to handle it. I think it's called Telelogic. It's something like that. And this private, for-profit company that got a no-bid contract has totally screwed it up. Or maybe they've done it exactly the way the Trump administration wanted. So even hospitals can't get good information anymore, much less state public health departments, much less, and probably most importantly from Trump's point of view, the media, the news agencies. Do you think he's going to pull this off? We'll be back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back. It's 27 minutes past the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now, almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they would be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top-secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war? How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred? How to win it, if such a thing is even possible? This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't, that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war, writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole. who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? This is the Thom Hartmann Book Club, the book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb. The book is Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. On this week's Science Revolution, is a drug maker sitting on a possible COVID-19 cure just due to greed? Dr. Stephen Enstrop, chief scientist for Polar Bears International, is here. Could polar bears be lost by 2100? Food and Water Watch's Tony Corbo dissects Cory Booker's bill to protect meat packers and why it's important. In Geeky Science, we'll talk about why the coronavirus vaccine may not work well for obese people and how that's a big problem. And lastly, Michelle Obama speaks about anxiety during the pandemic and what we can all do. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and amazing stuff. Merrill in Panguitch, Utah. Am I saying that right, Merrill?
Yes.
You're on the air. What's up?
Thank you. I watched Rachel Maddow last night, and I guess now we know what Putin and Trump have been talking about. Trump isn't smart enough to think of this stuff himself, but with Putin coaching him and the head of the KGB, when he was the head of the KGB, he learned all of these tricks, and he's passing them on to Trump. And the next thing, so then the only thing Trump needed was a attorney general that would go along with him, and that's all we've got. And so now we know what Trump and Putin have been talking about all these times when they're on the phone together.
Well, and I think that if you look at basically autocrats on the way up, from severe murderous autocrats like Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, to on the rise apartheid-era autocrats like Benjamin Netanyahu, you see that in all probability they're all advising Trump. I mean, he's hanging out with all these guys, and it's become like a club around the world of right-wing leaders who either have big money themselves, MBS, or have access to big money because of their right-wing leanings, Netanyahu, for example. And to a much smaller extent, Boris Johnson. You've got right-wing movements rising in Europe. You've got Viktor Orban in Hungary. You've got Duda in Poland. This is Modi in India has basically come out as a religious fascist. I think that there are a lot of models that Donald Trump is following. I have no doubt that in some of his conversations with President Putin that he's getting some good tips also. And the whole thing is just, very, very troubling, Merrill. It's very troubling. Thank you for the call. Rachel in Minneapolis. Hey, Rachel, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I really appreciate the parallels that you've drawn between fascist dictators in the past and some of the tactics that Trump is using currently. And as you said, his buddies who are helping him to get ahead. I'm wondering if we can learn from that, from past history, how to fight this before it gets to the point of the other fascist dictators. Specifically, I'm wondering what we can do to keep the post office alive if we can.
Yeah. That's going to require an act of Congress. It's way too late for the courts. And this is why I think Trump is springing a lot of this stuff right now, is that he knows that moving anything through the courts, all you have to do is just appeal and appeal and appeal until it hits the Supreme Court. And that's a process that typically takes at least 6 months and more frequently a couple of years. So basically, the Democrats' options with regard to the courts, like, for example, saying that they're going to sue around the executive orders. Well, actually, it was one executive order and 3 memorandums. Is just not happening. It's just not happening. And it's not going to happen. So, I think it's going to take a lot of people in the streets and peacefully, please, and a lot of people voting to clean this thing up. I just don't see where it's going to go anywhere else, Rachel. It's just it's very, very troubling. Joe Biden has a new ad out. Sean, do we have the audio on that yet? Rachel, thank you for the call. Let me just play this is just the audio. This is a 30-second TV ad, and the visual of this is Donald Trump playing golf. He's playing golf throughout this thing. And here's the soundtrack for Joe Biden's newest ad.
Donald Trump stepped off the golf course and signed an executive action directing funding cuts for Social Security. He also proposed slashing hundreds of billions of dollars from the Social Security Trust Fund every year, putting your hard-earned benefits in jeopardy. Nearly 4 million Florida seniors rely on Social Security. And once again, Donald Trump's failed leadership is hitting seniors the hardest.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
There you go. I mean, they're finally starting they're stopping the Mr. Nice Guy routine and moving in a direction that I think is quite consequential. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Just before I get started, not that you were keeping score or that you remember or care, but I think it was about 4 or 5 weeks ago that I told you that Russia would somehow miraculously be the first to have a vaccine. And my next prediction is that Donald Trump is gonna buy it from him.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking this morning, it occurred to me that probably what he'll do is say, it's time to allow Americans to buy drugs from overseas. And, suddenly there's going to be a very large internet market for Russian vaccines that you can self-administer.
Right.
Who knows?
I actually am surprised, and he probably will come up with this, but I'm surprised that for the campaign season, he hasn't come up with a, kind of an injection that they could call the COVID or the Corona-19 shield. And it would you line up, and before you go in the venue, they give you an injection that's 99.99% saline. And he'd also say it's got a half a microliter of or micromilliliter of hydroxychloroquine in it, so you can say that has that in it too, and then you will be protected while you're in the rally. And you may actually have protection beyond that too. I'm surprised you haven't come out with that.
Wouldn't surprise me actually if. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they did something like that with zinc tablets or vitamin D tablets. Although it takes months or weeks anyway to build your levels up to where they should be to help your immune system. But God only knows. Is that what you called about, Paul?
I want to take issue with something you said, Tom, in a friendly way. Is our democracy no more secure from despotism, but then to make sure that we vote for a nice guy? That's my question. And
obviously, if Joe Biden is elected, we have a massive project to undertake. We've got to fix the Patriot Act. We've got to fix executive power. We've got to make it so that a president can be prosecuted or at least investigated and prosecuted during his or her term in office. For crimes that they commit. I mean, we've got to get money out of politics. We've got to reverse these Supreme Court decisions. I mean, if we don't do this stuff in the next 4 years, if Democrats take the White House and Congress and don't accomplish these things, then when Tom Cotton becomes president in 2024, all bets are off.
Right, because when you said how far has Donald Trump taken us down this road, that's where I disagree. You see, we've already been down this road. And Donald Trump is the first one to say, hey, look, we're here. And
I can use this stuff. The stuff that George W. Bush and Dick Cheney gave us. Yeah, he's the first one to say, yes, I can use these precedents.
Yeah. And it's been there. And it's kind of like, I don't know, they always talk about the frog in the slowly boiling water. But it kind of, and the more, when you say going down this road, it kind of reminds me of one time when we were little kids on vacation, And we were in the car and kept saying, what, Dad, when are we going to be there? When are we going to be there? Well, finally, one time my dad, he pulled off the road. He pulled off the freeway I think it was like into a rest stop. He said, well, here we are. We're here. And we said, what? This is it? He said, yeah. And we said, well, where's the lake? Where's the cottage? He goes, oh, you wanted a lake and a cottage? Oh, well, it's going to take me some time to find one of those. So he says, well, let's go. He says, but don't bug me. It's going to take me a little time. So I shut up. And then finally my brother said, well, how long is it going to take you to find a lake and a cottage? And my dad said, well, we can go back to the other place if you want. You see, this is what Donald Trump has pulled on us.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the old switcheroo. Yeah, I am with you, and frankly, it's very distressing. Paul, thanks for the call. Daryl in Farmington, Washington. Hey, Daryl, what's up?
Hello, hello, Tom. I wanted to comment on the military and the culture in the military that has changed so much. I served nearly 30 years, and I am a PhD candidate in American Studies. And I got to say, I watched it sadly change from a military that was controlled by the civilian into a professional soldier military of mercenaries and soldiers of fortune. That's what we got now.
Well, this is the result of abandoning the draft.
That is,
in my opinion,
and other things. But we have allowed this monster to create itself. And now we're watching Trump, who can take advantage of that and turn it against us. Hello?
Yeah, I would give anything to well, not anything, but I would find it very fascinating to have a candid conversation with Mark Esper, our defense secretary. Although, frankly, I doubt that's that's going to happen for any reporter or commentator. But I share your concern. And then on top of that, you look at Mikey Weinstein. This was during the Bush administration. Mikey Weinstein sued the Air Force Academy on behalf of his son, who was in the academy, because he and his son are Jewish, and the academy was openly promoting right-wing, white racist evangelicalism, so-called Christianity. And these guys, these fascists, have infiltrated our police, our military, pretty much every dimension of American life. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stick around. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Larry in Jefferson County, Illinois. Hey, Larry, what do you disagree with me about?
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
In your mind, what is the defining line between a political protest and a riot?
Violence.
Well, how do you define violence?
Assaulting persons or property.
Okay, so that's what
John Lewis never threw a Molotov cocktail. John Lewis never smashed a window. John Lewis never threw a punch. That's the difference. That's peaceful protest.
I'm talking about your definition.
My definition of peaceful protest is what John Lewis did. I am not in agreement with people who are using violent tactics. I think that those are handing Donald Trump campaign commercials. I agree with Ted Wheeler on this.
So,
our mayor here in Portland.
Why do you not condemn them? Why don't you condemn them?
I have on multiple occasions on this program, Larry.
Okay, do it now. Right now.
Yeah, anybody who is using violence against other persons or against property is simply creating the next TV commercial for Donald Trump.
I
just said it a few minutes ago. What's your problem, Larry?
I want to know, in your mind, your own personal mind, what is the difference between protest and violence?
Yeah, I just explained that, Larry, and it's like, what do you think, you're a Fox host and you're gonna somehow gotcha me? Give me a break. Come on. we're grown-ups here. Anthony in Seattle. Hey, Anthony, what's on your mind?
Hey, I just at first I wanted to say something about the fact that it just blows me away that the media doesn't talk more about the fact that Trump just keeps inserting all his little talking heads. But you mentioned something about the masks to healthcare workers, and I've noticed on some of these commercials for like Bald Head and all these other like little whatever products you want to call it. At the end of the commercials, they always have, oh, here, and we'll send you these 10 healthcare worker quality masks for free, and it's like, oh, and we'll send it to you from our American warehouse. So I'm wondering, like, is this where all of our masks that disappeared months and months ago have wound up, instead of going to the red states, they're just using them to sell products and making the millions off of that.
Yeah, I think the mask shortage has largely resolved itself, Anthony. Even in medical circles, there are large issues with PPE, disposable gowns, face masks. I'm pretty sure that we're meeting the mask requirements. Although, again, there's no good reporting on this. The statistics have been taken away from the Centers for Disease Control and put with HHS. So there's really no way of knowing. But it's I'm not so concerned about for-profit sites. I mean, we've got an advertiser that's selling KN95 masks. I'm pretty sure they're made in Korea or China. They may be coming out of an American warehouse. But people are importing stuff and selling it, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's Donald Trump does that for a living. I'm not. The thing I'm concerned about is the seizure of information and the lack of good testing. Testing is the key to this whole thing, and we're not doing it. We'll be back.
The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream.
Hi, Thom Hartmann here. My new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. American monopolies dominate, control, and consume most of the energy of our entire economic system. They function the same as cancer does in a body, and like cancer, they weaken our systems while threatening to crash the entire body economic. American monopolies have also seized massive political power and use it to maintain their obscene profits and CEO salaries while crushing small competitors. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, quote, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series. Available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Steve in Bellingham. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. You were talking earlier about the Kushner and Trump deciding not to fight the COVID outbreak after they found out it was hitting mostly blue states and, by the way, African Americans and poor people. Yeah. I'm really glad that you're talking about that because, it's really easy for us all to get scandal weary, scandal fatigue. There's so many that just keep coming. But to me, this one is the granddaddy of all scandals. This is the mother of all scandals. This is mass murder. It's, technically you could call it negligent homicide, I guess. But it's, basically it's a lot like what Stalin did when he allowed millions of people to starve. He didn't murder them. He just let them die. Most
of that was in Ukraine, actually. But point taken.
What Stalin was doing with Ukraine was the same thing that the British did with Ireland in the 1850s. Ireland was actually exporting wheat to England to make into bread to feed the British, at the same time that 1 million people died of starvation when the potato blight happened and the potato crop failed. The Irish were not allowed to eat the wheat; they had to export it. Stalin did the exact same thing, or very nearly exact same thing, with Ukraine in the late 1930s. When was that? This was before the war. It was like in the 1930s, I believe, before Russia was involved in the war. And in fact, I think it was the early 1930s, and killed millions of people in Ukraine that way. Anyhow, back to you.
Well, thank you. You're right. You're a great historian, but unfortunately, if Trump wins, we may just get pure Orwellian propaganda in the future. But if justice returns to America, that's the big scandal that by far, that mass murder is, hopefully he's got to pay for that. That's huge. That's worse. That's as bad as anything Hitler did, and I'll just say it. Stalin killed more people than Hitler. Well,
Hitler.
More people
what
died.
Hitler did was an order of magnitude worse than anything Donald Trump has done. And, Donald Trump has been responsible for 160,000 deaths so far in the United States because he didn't stop the virus early on, like New Zealand did, like Australia did, like, Taiwan did, like South Korea did, much of Europe did after they figured out what was going on with Italy. He didn't stop that. But that's a different thing from an intentional plan to kill people. Now, you could say that when they pulled back after the April 7th revelation, that that blood is on their hands. But I think comparing it with Hitler weakens your argument, frankly. I mean, Hitler was an evil at a level that we have not, I don't think that we've seen in the United States, and I pray to God we never see. By the way, Beth Moore, who's running in the Georgia House, she's taking testimony from teachers in Georgia. She's Georgia House of Representatives in the 95th District in Georgia. Moore for Georgia, Moore for Georgia is her Twitter handle. She says, this is the worst testimony so far from a verified teacher in a North Georgia school district. Quote, I am planning for 27 students in my tiny classroom. They are not making masks mandatory. My principal is joking to people that this is, quote, God's cleansing plan, end quote. Wow.
You're right. You're right, Tom. I got carried away there. But just, my point is, letting people die of this illness is just horrible. It is mass murder.
Well, he's not just letting it happen. He's actually trying to politically capitalize on it. The idea that older people are going to get wiped out by this and therefore they're afraid to go to the polls. Older people are concerned about Social Security and Medicare. So Trump thinks that if, they're going to be voting by mail, so he's going to stop the mail-in vote. For example, he's actually building on this crisis to develop political capital. It's mind-boggling. Steve, thank you for the call. Michael in Fort Collins. Michael, we got a little less than a minute. You got a quick one?
I was watching CNN last night, and they did a little thing on mail-in voting here in Colorado and how it works really well. And then Anderson Cooper was interviewing, I think it was Lieutenant Governor or the Attorney General of Alabama, and he gave the stats over why they use absentee versus universal mail-in, saying it costs $5.5 million per cycle with absentee versus $18 million per cycle with universal mail-in. And all it seemed to me was a way to help suppress the vote. I wish Anderson had pushed back on him more, and I was wondering what your thoughts on that were, and
Well, what the guy was missing, Michael, was, it may cost $18 million for Alabama to do universal mail-in balloting compared to $5 million for the cost of mailing out what they have right now. And I'm guessing most of that's postage expense. But he's not including, if you do universal mail-in ballots, you don't need polling locations. So he didn't include the cost of all those polling locations, hiring all those people, paying for all those machines, paying all these private contractors for maintenance on voting machines, maintaining the voting machines, programming the voting machines. He didn't include any of that stuff. So, he was just lying through his teeth. Michael, thank you. Thank you very much for pointing that out. We'll be back, with the question about the bullies. Really, seriously. Who's going to win, the bullies or the nerds?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps Hair Loss Treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book club book for today is Talk Radio's America by Brian Rosenwald, subtitled How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Then Took Over the United States. This is from the introduction. August 1, 1988 marked the beginning of the long road to President Donald Trump. But even political junkies took little notice of the fateful events that unfolded that day as a failed disc jockey and former Kansas City Royals executive named Rush Hudson Limbaugh III made his national radio debut. Only a small audience tuned in. So poorly commemorated was the moment that we don't even know how many stations broadcast day one of Limbaugh's syndicated program. Limbaugh claims the show began on 56 affiliates, while other counts range from 57 and 87. From the beginning, the show was brash, entertaining, controversial, and boundary-pushing. Before Limbaugh, this sort of programming did not exist outside major cities. In 1983, there were just 59 talk radio stations nationwide, and the program on many of those stations consisted of advice shows, staged interviews, and caller-driven discussions of everything from neighborhood schools to abominable snowmen. Most talk radio programming focused on local concerns, and most of the industry's stars, such as Larry King and Sally Jesse Raphael, had left-of-center views but rarely shared them. At the time of Limbaugh's national debut, talk radio had negligible political impact. In talk radio hotbeds such as Boston, hosts might influence local and statewide policy debates, especially on visceral issues such as seatbelt laws, but talk radio was not a partisan force, and it had no role in national politics. In fact, the wall-to-wall conservative political talk stations that dominate the AM airwaves today were impossible until 1987, thanks to a regulation called the Fairness Doctrine. That year, however, the Federal Communications Commission eliminated the policy, which required broadcasters of opinionated programming on controversial issues to offer an array of viewpoints. In this more permissive environment, Limbaugh would go on to revolutionize the radio business. In doing so, he helped unintentionally to spawn a major new political player. Within a decade, the broadcast format he inaugurated aired on more than 1,000 stations and kept millions company as they commuted, worked, and shouted back at their radios. It took just a few years before conservative talk radio began to influence national politics and public policy. That influence only grew throughout the decades as the business changed. Over the course of the 1990s and early 2000s, the number of nationally syndicated talk shows rose dramatically, and the content of talk radio programs became increasingly political and conservative. Liberal pundits and some scholars agree on the broad outlines of the story. Conservative station executives conspiring with their Republican allies built a format modeled on Limbaugh's program, and thousands of Limbaugh wannabes cropped up all over the country. Executives, hosts, and politicians turned talk radio into an appendage of the Republican Party, using the platform to get Republicans elected and advance the party's agenda. The success of talk radio led to the development of partisan and ideological cable news networks, and some hosts complemented their radio shows with primetime cable programs. Eventually, this content found a home in the new digital sphere, with equally strident cheerleaders proliferating on blogs and other online publications. This narrative makes sense, especially to liberals. After all, many conservative media executives and their corporate political action committees donate to Republican candidates, and most hosts champion conservative candidates and causes. But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two, But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two distinct, complex tales. Neither has anything to do with the conspiracy to create a media servant of the Republican Party. The first describes how talk radio spread across America, in the process saving AM radio from financial ruin. Limbaugh had no intention of affecting elections or legislation, and no inkling that he could. Nor did any of his early successors. The executives who gave these hosts a chance also had no interest in political outcomes. Hosts and their bosses were in business. They wanted to captivate listeners and make money, and they discovered, essentially by accident, that conservative political talk in the mouth of an entertaining personality achieved this. Conservative hosts had strong opinions, but their primary goal was, and still is, financial gain. And it is because they realized financial gain that more and more stations invested in their style and content while divesting from competing formats. The second story concerns talk radio's transformation, after 1995, into an almost entirely conservative and doctrinaire medium that eventually spawned successors in other media, took over the Republican Party, and reshaped it in hosts' and listeners' image. Limbaugh was a great innovator, but he didn't change American media and politics all at once or on his own. In conservative talk radio's early days, hosts shared stations with liberal talkers and apolitical programs. There was not an immediate sense that conservative radio was the future either. But gradually, its success snowballed thanks to trial and error in the radio business, regulatory changes, political events, happenstance, and most importantly, listener behavior. Hosts also got a boost from marginalized conservative Republican politicians who realized that talk radio would enable them to circumnavigate the mainstream media, and deliver their message directly to voters. The book, Talk Radio's America.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So who's going to win, the bullies or the nerds? No, seriously, it's this is what I think. So much of Trump's campaign, his candidacy back in 2016, the behavior of his agencies, particularly his police agencies, those associated with the Department of Justice and ICE, here in Portland and other cities around America, it all comes down to behaving like a bully. And this is one of the most difficult things, I think, for most human beings throughout their lives, is how do you respond to a bully? How do you respond to a bully when you're a kid and the bully has the power to overwhelm you? How do you respond to a bully in the workplace, particularly when the bully is your boss? How do you respond to a bully, to a political bully? I mean, this is just breathtaking, and the bullies are basically saying, it's our way or the highway. Don't listen to those damn scientists. We're going to open the schools. We're going to do whatever we want. We're going to, et cetera. For example, in Idaho, this is the Idaho legislature is controlled by Republicans, both the House and Senate, and Republican Stephen Thane of Emmett, Idaho, This was reported on Boise State Public Radio, by the way. It says basically that public health officials, scientists, are elitists. Because, you know, they've got college degrees and they study science. And we shouldn't listen to elitists. Here's literally exactly what he said. These are his words. Quote, this is Stephen Thane, member of the Idaho State Senate, Republican. Quote, we're letting a few fearful people control the lives of those who are not fearful. Listening to experts to set policy is an elitist approach. And I'm very fearful of an elitist approach. I'm also fearful that it leads to totalitarianism, especially when you say, well, we're doing it for the public good. Think about how that turns reality inside out, turns it on its head. It literally is flipping the obligations of government upside down. The role of government, as clearly laid out in the preamble to the Constitution, if no place else, is to defend and support and promote the public good, the public welfare. It's the whole point. It's why we have government. This is the preamble. It's all one sentence. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. We want the public good to be defended. That's why we elect people. That's why we have a government. And here we have, let me just read this one more time. This is how Republicans are thinking all around the country. This just happens to be Stephen Thane, a Republican from Emmett, the state senator in Idaho. He says, we're letting a few fearful people control the lives of those of us who are not fearful. Listening to experts to set policy is an elitist approach, and I'm very fearful of an elitist approach. I'm also fearful that it leads to totalitarianism, especially when you say, well, we're doing it for the public good. So for the public good, what are we supposed to do? Nothing? I know that that's, you know, how the Koch brothers traditionally thought. That's what David Koch ran on in 1980 when he ran for president or vice president of the United States on the Libertarian ticket. Privatize Medicare, privatize Social Security, end Medicaid, end all public schooling in the United States, end all regulation of polluting companies in the United States, end all taxation of billionaires in the United States. Those were literally his campaign positions. You want to see the whole thing, just Google David Koch and Bernie Sanders. Bernie's got the whole thing on his website, has had it there for years, easy to find. So is that what you want? The federal government does not protect the people? Or do you want what Donald Trump is trying to create, a federal government that is actively endangering the people? Just letting 5 million Americans now infected. And people say, oh, well, you know, I'm a young guy. I don't have to worry about that. Well, here we've got a guy, Spencer Rollison of Canaveral Groves, Florida. He's not black, he's not Hispanic, and he's not obese. He doesn't have pre-existing conditions. He's a healthy 21-year-old white guy. And he tested positive for the coronavirus in May. The story's over by Travis Getty's over at Raw Story. The 21-year-old Florida man experiences organ failure after recovering from mild COVID case. He says, I had a little bit of a cough, a slight fever of 99.4, I think, for the first couple of days. And then after that, I lost smell for about 2.5 weeks. And that was my only symptom for the entire 2 weeks. On May 21st, I got a negative test result finally. So he goes back to work. He says, I feel fine. I tested negative. I work outside. I was wearing a jacket. It was 96 degrees outside. He was working in Florida. And I was still cold. I was sick again. On June 11th is when I started feeling it all again. My fever ended up going to 103.4 for like 2 days. He passed out during a doctor's appointment. They took him to the hospital, and his heart and multiple other organs had failed. He says, something from coronavirus weakened my immune system, which caused me to have all these other symptoms and end up with sepsis and all that. He said, I wasn't on a ventilator. I think it's called BiPAP. It's a mask that they put on your face and it gets strapped on and it basically does the breathing for you. He said, I shouldn't get my heart rate up right now because it can lead to a heart attack, to cardiac arrest. He said, I thought coronavirus wasn't that big a deal. That's the reason I posted on Facebook to my friends and family. Take this seriously. I'm 21 years old. I have a great health record, no issues, and it almost took my life. There's no reason to take this lightly. I can't urge people enough to take it seriously. Meanwhile, over at the Palm Beach Post, the headline, an article by Andrew Mara reads, health directors told to keep quiet as Florida leaders press to reopen classrooms. Now, typically you would think during a pandemic, the decision to open public schools would not be up to the public schools, it would be up to the public health officials, right? I mean, that's that whole idea of promoting the general welfare that I just read you out of the preamble to the Constitution. Well, here it is. This is the article from the Palm Beach Post from the paper yesterday. Following a directive from the Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor of Florida, from DeSantis' administration, county health directors across Florida refused to give school boards advice on whether to reopen schools in a worsening pandemic. This is according to a Gannett USA Today network review. For frustrated school board members, it was a puzzling turnabout, writes Andrew Mara. Florida's public schools have long depended on public health directors for recommendations on everything from reducing encephalitis risks at football games to how to test students during tuberculosis outbreaks. But the director's new reticence aligned perfectly with DeSantis' stated goal of pressuring Florida public schools to offer in-person classes. And lacking clear guidance from local health directors, school board members in many counties said they felt compelled to reopen classrooms, despite serious misgivings. In fact, keeping campuses closed, again, this is from this article in the Palm Beach Post today, keeping campuses closed, they said, risked violating an edict last month from State Education Commissioner Richard Corcoran, DeSantis and Trump toady, which decreed public schools must open, quote, brick and mortar schools at least 5 days per week, end quote. School board member in Lake County, Mark Dodd, he says, when we voted to reopen schools, I'll be honest and tell you, it was because we were under an executive order to do so. Do I think they're safe? Absolutely not. Are the bullies going to win? Or is the coronavirus going to kick their ass? I mean, so far you got 170,000 dead Americans. It doesn't seem to have touched Trump.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
At least with the Republican Party, which still more than 90% supports him. Where does this go? 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Oh my, Michael in Seattle watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey Michael, what's up? What's on your mind?
Well, blessings to you, Tom. I was just saying to my wife that the plot against the post office and the Republicans' endgame is clear. So I think it might be time to focus on getting millions of folks to the polls or ballot drop boxes in critical states. And a way to do that would be enrolling the young Black Lives Matter, March for Our Lives, climate activists, just to name a few young people involved in accompanying and being present and observing and protecting the vote by the millions if necessary. And I believe that those young groups could be enrolled to do that. I think that it's time to stop focusing on what we know is going to happen with the post office. I'd love your thoughts.
I think to a large extent you're right, Michael. And were I in the leadership of the Sunrise Movement or one of the local Black Lives Matter groups, I would be arguing in favor of shifting to a focus. And by the way, you look at the civil rights movement back in the 1950s and 1960s, and you see this constant, movement back and forth, although they were doing both at the same time. But between public demonstration on the one hand and a more low-profile, quiet, grassroots organizing people to get them registered to vote. And so I would put voter registration at the top of the list for any of those groups. I think that's a good and important suggestion. Michael, thank you for that. Mike from Michael to Mike in Anderson, Washington Island. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom.
What's up?
So, anyways, I'm over here on Anderson Island. We have the only way on and off the island is by ferry, and so we have a park and ride that people that walk on and off the ferry, they can park their car and so forth. In the parking lot is a drop box. Okay, it's one of many drop boxes throughout Pierce County, but one of the concerns I had,
a ballot drop box?
Yeah, a ballot drop box. It looks like it looks like a post office, mailbox,
like
but without a drop-down lid. It's got an open slot. Now, one of my concerns, was that for tampering and vandalism, maybe somebody dropping paint down inside or dropping flammable material or something like that. So I called my election committee, election board, and asked them what kind of security they have. And they have, they have a built-in fire extinguisher, for one, and they collect the ballots every other day during voting season. And so they have pretty good security. And, so
they should have cameras like ATMs do,
Excuse me?
They should have cameras like ATMs do. They're cheap these days.
Well, they do have a camera for the whole parking lot, but not specifically for that ballot box. But they have ballot boxes everywhere. I hear the music. So, that's one way to circumvent this post office purge, or whatever you want to call it.
The problem is that, put it in the drop box. Yeah, I'm totally with you, Mike. My concern is that other states, particularly red states, will not even be putting out drop boxes. But we'll see. Mike, thanks for the call. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. Well, it's now moved from the Trump administration, gratuitously trying to make it harder, for example, to get on Social Security. When Trump came in, he announced that they would give early retirement to 15,000 employees of the Social Security Administration, to 20,000 employees of the Internal Revenue Service. Basically making our public services, the IRS is no longer auditing very rich people because it's so expensive and time consuming. They're just auditing working people who might have claimed like a home office deduction or a earned income tax credit. And the Social Security Department, now it takes more than 2 years to process a disability claim. So people who are disabled through no fault of their own get no money for at least 2 years. And in all probability have to hire a lawyer to get there, which is, an upfront expense that a lot of people can't afford. So, this kind of, what would you call it, passive-aggressive behavior, where they're not really sticking you in the face with a stick. They're instead just like putting up barriers to your walking forward. So every time you try and move a little forward, you trip and fall. Well, it's getting even worse. Now they want to punish unemployed people in the United States by restricting their access to food. Food. You can live for 6 or 7 minutes without air, depending on who you are and where you are, maybe 3 or 4 minutes before you pass out. You can live for a couple of days without water, before your kidneys fail and your whole body starts to crash. And you can probably go a few weeks or even a few months, depending on how much body fat you have, without food. But these are essentially essential to life. We're not talking about, in whether you can go shopping at Walmart with or without a mask. We're talking about whether you can stay alive. Feeding America, which is a nonprofit that runs food banks, they reported record levels of food insecurity, projecting 54 million Americans, including 1 in 4 children. Keep in mind, over 40 million Americans have applied for unemployment benefits since Trump let the first wave of coronavirus into the United States back in January. 54 million Americans, including 1 in 4 American children, would not have enough to eat throughout the duration of this crisis. Now, that projection was back in May. Here we are today. Now the Trump administration is saying no to expanding SNAP. And now just to explain how this plays out, back in March, in fact, March 18th, when Republicans and Democrats alike thought that the coronavirus was basically a threat to human life, to American lives. This is before Republicans figured out, that was April 7th, that it's more of a threat to Black and Hispanic lives and to elderly lives than it is to white, middle-age, or younger lives. Back before then, we're back in March, when everybody was in agreement, America has to do something. A law was passed. It was called the Families First Act. It came out of the House. It passed the Senate. Trump signed it into law. And what it did is it gave states the flexibility to change their SNAP requirements. SNAP is food stamps, right? It's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, also, what we've historically referred to as food stamps. And they no longer call it food stamps because it used to be little coupons, but now it's a digital card, by and large. And prior to March 18th, it was fairly hard to get food stamps. You had to jump through a whole bunch of hoops, and you had to demonstrate, how long you'd been out of work, and you had to prove that you were worthy of it, essentially. I mean, Republicans have really, really, really tightened food stamp requirements particularly during the Bush administration. But on March 18th, they loosened that up to say, well, if you've been unemployed for a week, you can apply for food stamps. In other words, if you just lost your job, because we're assuming if you just lost a job as a waiter in a restaurant, for example, you're probably going to be unemployed for a few months. So sure, we'll get you some food. If you just lost a job in an industry that is basically going to go away or be badly harmed for months, maybe years, if you're working in a hotel, if you're working in a restaurant, if you're working in a theater, we're going to make sure that you don't starve. I mean, how much more basic does it get? Right? We're going to make sure you don't starve. And so from March 18th until this week, it was really easy for people who had been unemployed as a result of this virus and the Trump administration's failure to stop this virus from coming into the United States and spreading through our population and infecting 5 million of us and killing 170,000 of us. Starting on March 18th, it was a lot easier for you to get food because of that failure of the Republican Party. But now, the Trump administration has said no. This is the Department of Agriculture. That's Sonny Perdue's agency. I tweeted about this yesterday, and I included his Twitter handle. You can find it over my Twitter timeline. He's telling states to return to, quote, normal operations and put limits on food assistance. We don't need to feed those people who are unemployed. Let them start, banging down their neighbors' doors and stealing food. That'll make a nice photo op for the Trump campaign. Right? If people are hungry enough, maybe they'll start to riot. Maybe they'll start smashing the windows at the local 7-Eleven or the food store. That'll help the campaign. That'll give us a good law and order soundbite. So let's just, cut the food to 1 in 4 American children and their parents who are getting desperate. How do you think this is going to play out? Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for We the People. We'll be back with your calls. Actually, we've got a guest right after this, and then I'll be picking up your calls. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Next, Dr. Howard Koh, professor of public health over at Harvard, who has worked with the Biden campaign. We'll be back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Pat Mitchell. It's titled Becoming a Dangerous Woman, Embracing Risk to Change the World. This is from the preface titled The Most Dangerous Woman in the Room. Yes, I'll be there. Eve Ensler was calling with an invitation to what she described as the meeting of movements, planned for the first week of January 2017. In the wake of a polarizing presidential election in the United States, Eve had decided it was time for activists to come together to shape strategies that would unify and leverage the collective power of a wide range of social justice organizations. Who else is coming, I asked. I'm not releasing the invitation list, Eve replied, but you'll want to be in the room. Indeed, I did want to be in that room, knowing from past experiences that any meeting or event that Eve organized would be meaningful. So I showed up, as the invitation indicated, at an nondescript building in Stone Ridge, New York, and surrendered my cell phone to smiling young volunteers at the front door. Best to have all communication devices outside the room, was the explanation, which of course heightened my anticipation about what would transpire within the room. I entered a large room and saw Eve standing at the front with folding chairs in a circle. Mingling about the room were some familiar faces, the meeting's other conveners, Kimberly Crenshaw of the African American Policy Forum, Naomi Klein, award-winning author and activist, independent media entrepreneur and journalist Laura Flanders, and Jane Fonda, actor and activist. We were asked to find our seats, and Eve began. "We are living in dangerous times," was her opening line, and such times call for new levels of activism from all the communities represented in this room. Let's begin by identifying who's in the room. One by one, the introductions began. I'm one of the founders of the Women's March. I'm the executive director of 350.org. I run Project South. With each introduction, the level of leadership and activists' credentials became more impressive and, for me, more intimidating. I could feel my anxiety building. How was I going to identify myself? I have no title and was no longer running an organization, having left my CEO position at the Paley Center for Media the previous spring. I could say that I was the CEO of Pat Mitchell Media with its grand total of 2 employees, including myself, but that felt wholly inadequate to explain why I belonged in that room. I mentally rehearsed some other options. I could say I was a lifetime advocate for women, true enough if a little vague. I could list some of my previous titles, but why make a point of being the former anything? I was struggling to come up with how to identify myself in the present, an identity that would hopefully give some indication of why Eve had included me in this circle of activists and leaders. Finally, it was my turn. Before I knew it, I heard myself saying, "I'm Pat Mitchell, and I'm a dangerous woman." I'm not sure exactly what prompted this personal declaration of dangerousness, but I could tell from the looks of surprise that I needed to add a bit more context. At this time in my life, about to turn 75, I continued, I have nothing left to prove, less to lose, and I'm ready to take more risks and to be less politic and polite. As Eve said, these are dangerous times, and dangerous times call for dangerous women. That got a big sisterly yes from Eve and others in the circle, including Jane Fonda, who was sitting across from me and stood up declaring, "Well, I'm older than my friend Pat, so that makes me even more dangerous." Laughter erupted, of course, and I could sense that others were contemplating exactly what becoming more dangerous to meet the challenges of dangerous times would mean for each of us and for the work we had convened to consider. Certainly, Jane Fonda's life of activism is a textbook case for being bold and brave. During our many years of friendship, I've witnessed her willingness to take risks for a good cause, to speak out and show up, even when it meant personal peril or sacrifice. At 81, she is still on the front lines, campaigning for domestic and restaurant workers' rights, standing with the American Indian communities, protesting natural resource exploitation at Standing Rock, and busier as an actor than ever. In her book, Prime Time, Jane advanced the idea that Older women have the potential to become the most powerful population on the planet. She's a great example of how we embrace that potential at every age. My personal potential for becoming dangerous is perhaps more directly linked to my friendship with Eve Ensler. From our first conversation in war-torn Sarajevo in 1998, I've been deeply inspired by her courage and her commitment to do whatever is necessary to end violence against women everywhere. Taking risks comes easier to Eve than to many. Writing and performing the vagina monologues, making it the centerpiece of a global movement, V-Day, to end gender-based violence, is a transformative approach to activism that I feel privileged to have experienced. Yes, I was an activist and woman's advocate before I met Eve, but through my relationship with her and as a board member of the V-Day movement, I've met activists facing dangers every day to create change in some of the most difficult places on earth to be a woman. But until that day, I had not felt dangerous myself. Declaring myself a dangerous woman still feels a bit, well, dangerous. And I readily admit to some second thoughts about declaring it even more widely and boldly as the title of this book. But every day since that convening, I'm discovering more about what being dangerous means in my life and why I believe that it's time for us, women and the men who stand with us, at whatever age or place in life's journey, to embrace risks and engage with renewed passion and collective purpose in making the world a safer place for women and girls. Pat Mitchell, Becoming a Dangerous Woman.
On this week's Science Revolution, is a drug maker sitting on a possible COVID-19 cure just due to greed? Dr. Stephen Enstrop, Chief Scientist for Polar Bears International, is here. Could polar bears be lost by 2100? Food and Water Watch's Tony Corbo dissects Cory Booker's bill to protect meat packers and why it's important. In Geeky Science, we'll talk about why the coronavirus vaccine may not work well for obese people and how that's a big problem. And lastly, Michelle Obama speaks about anxiety during the pandemic and what we can all do. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. So looking at, we've been talking in the previous hour and a half, well, for days now, about, the coronavirus and the Trump administration response to it, particularly the response since April 7th, when all the newspapers and electronic media in the United States announced that black and Hispanic folks were dying at disproportionate rates to white people. That was the week that all of a sudden, basically the entire Republican Party and Freedom Works and a bunch of these right-wing groups suddenly started saying, oh, it's time to open America back up. The week before that, everybody was in lockdown and everybody was in step with that. So what would somebody who has actually overseen the Office of the Surgeon General say about this? Somebody who has overseen the Commission Corps of the U.S. Public Health Service, somebody who oversaw the Department of HHS's Office of Public Health and Science, the former Assistant Secretary of Health for HHS, confirmed by the Senate in 2009, nominated by President Obama, and a professor of public health leadership at Harvard. Well, such a person is on the line with us, Dr. Howard Koh. Dr. Koh, and his Twitter handle is Dr. Howard KOH. If you want to, reach out to him, the website hsph.harvard.edu. Dr. Koh, welcome to the program. What are the things that we're doing wrong that we could or should be doing right? The lessons that we can not just learn from other countries, but also from, for example, the time that you had when you were working in this field.
Well, Tom, thanks for having me on. You know, we're into month 7 and counting in the worst pandemic our nation has faced in over a century, and we still don't have a national strategy for how to move forward. And it's so critical to talk about this, especially as the fall is arriving and flu season will be here, especially when schools and colleges are thinking about how to reopen, especially when sports teams are trying to figure out how to get back on track. Until now, Tom, we've had 50 states going in 50 different directions. We've had states competing with each other for supplies and PPE and test kits. We've had inconsistent messaging from the White House. In fact, the only consistent part of it has been the inconsistency. And so it's led to a patchwork response, which has resulted in now over 5 million cases and 160,000 plus deaths. So we need more national coordination. We need more strategies. We need to test not just harder, but smarter. And we need a more proactive approach going forward.
Do you see any of those things being discussed by anybody in this administration?
Well, we are very hopeful about a COVID vaccine coming online. So that gives us a lot of promise to look forward to. And we have an outstanding scientific effort going on by NIH and in partnership with pharma. And we also have leaders like Dr. Fauci, who I had the great honor of working closely with, who is overseeing that scientific effort. It's very important, though, to make sure that we coordinate the seasonal flu efforts this coming fall and the messaging and the communication with whatever COVID vaccine effort comes next. When I was Assistant Secretary in 2009, Tom, we did that with a one government approach where we had 2 simultaneous flu vaccination campaigns going on in the U.S., H1N1 vaccine and seasonal flu vaccine. It was not easy, but the only way we got through it was a one government approach that brought together federal, state, and local health officials, and that's what we need going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you worked in the Obama administration. You know Joe Biden. How do you think a Biden presidency would deal with this, or should deal with this, for that matter?
Well, the vice president actually published an op-ed in January when the first few cases of the novel coronavirus were occurring in the U.S., and that op-ed summarized his experience in government. Anybody who has served in government, especially in the midst of public health crises, knows that these crises are inevitable. It's not a question of if, but when. And so to be prepared, to be proactive, to have plans, to have all of government working together, to protect high-risk groups, to stay ahead of the curve at all times is critically important, and that has not happened to date. So I'm anticipating, if the Biden campaign is successful, that philosophy will be restored.
Dr. Ko, this morning, one of the big news stories was that President Putin of Russia had ordered his equivalent of the FDA to, on an emergency basis, set aside the requirement for phase 3 testing of a vaccine. That's where, phase 1, give it to a small number of people, make sure nobody dies. Phase 2, give it to a slightly larger number of people and see if it has, if it produces a good, strong immune response. Phase 3, try it out on tens of thousands of people and see if there's, we saw with during Jerry Ford's administration, we really didn't apparently do that third stage aggressively enough, because we ended up with all these people getting as I recall, it was swine flu vaccine, and you had this Guillain-Barré syndrome, neurological disorder. But, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this stuff, please. But in the context of answering this question, I mean, Russia has said we don't need to do this and we're going to roll out a vaccine. How concerned are you that Donald Trump may do the same thing here?
Well, we're watching what our peer nations are doing with respect to COVID response. The announcement from Russia this morning is very alarming, because here in the U.S., we have a well-developed process of vaccine development, testing, trials, release, and then tracking of outcomes, particularly safety outcomes. We've done that here in the U.S. and, of course, in many other places around the world multiple times for multiple vaccines. And so when a new vaccine is being developed and tested, it's got to go through those phases that you described, Tom. We have to have excellent data and science. We have to have the best scientists looking at the data and deciding when a vaccine is deemed effective, having the FDA work closely in this process, of course. In Russia, that has not occurred. What I am seeing and what we're reading is that they're making that vaccine available to people when the trials have not been completed. In fact, have barely started. So that's not the way to do it. Here in the U.S., we need to follow those standards and that process very, very carefully, keep the science at the highest level. And then when a vaccine is approved by the FDA and released, we have to track the safety profile very, very carefully, because that's what the American people need and deserve.
The fastest we have ever taken a vaccine from initial development to final widespread distribution was the mumps vaccine. It took 4 years. Again, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I just read it in the popular press. You're the scientist and professor. But what makes us think that we can produce a vaccine in 6 months or 8 months or 10 months even, when typically, when the fastest vaccine that the United States has ever developed in 200 years took 4 years?
Well, that's a good question, and you know your public health history very well. So you're right. Vaccine development usually takes on the order of decades or years. The COVID vaccine has been fast-tracked and could be available in a matter of months, that is, at the end of this year or early next year. Through this process, we have understood over the years that when a vaccine is critical, as it is now, we have to stay ahead of the curve. I've served in government in past administrations where there were vaccine shortages at key times, and no one wanted that to happen. So this philosophy now that's being implemented by the administration has evolved over multiple administrations over multiple years. You may know that the U.S. government has already bought up millions, in fact, billions of doses of vaccines from multiple companies, even though no vaccine has been proven yet, because they don't want to lose any time if one of them is proven effective. So that is a strategy we're all banking on to get people the vaccine they need and deserve when one is found scientifically to work.
Yeah, if money is no object, then that makes a certain amount of sense. My concern is that, typically it takes a year or so before you even know what the side effects are. I mean, that's why typically vaccine trials take 4 to 10 years.
Yeah, that's right. So that's why monitoring safety outcomes is critical, not just now when vaccines are being researched, but later when vaccines are disseminated
as they're rolled out,
being administered to people. Yeah. Right.
Dr. Howard Koh, professor of public health at Harvard University and former head of, all that stuff I listed at the very beginning. Dr. Koh, thanks so much for dropping by. It's great talking to you.
Thank you, Tom. Tom, a pleasure. Thank you.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls, actually, right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Nancy in Woodland, California. Hey, Nancy, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, you just asked about bullies earlier, and bullies like Trump and his cohorts really need to be held accountable in a meaningful way. Like during the impeachment trial, they kept, they wouldn't cooperate with Congress. He told people not to testify. They wouldn't give up documents and so forth. And no one was held in contempt of Congress. And I remember various people were talking about that during the time. And now I guess Pompeo is doing the same thing, and he needs to be held in contempt of Congress. And, for instance, in Portland, when those Trump's goons went in and started attacking the peaceful protesters, the local authorities should have immediately arrested them, and or the governor should have sent in the National Guard to protect the protesters, which is what happened in 1936 in Michigan, when they had the GM strike, and the governor sent in the National Guard to protect the strikers. So anyway, that's just my thought, that if they're not held accountable in a meaningful way, in a forceful way, and I don't mean a violent way, but, meaningful, then they just keep doing it because, he doesn't have any consequences.
I agree. Nancy Pelosi's got to be just like absolutely overwhelmed because there's this huge swarm of basically crimes that have been committed by Trump and his buddies that it's like, where do you start? You know, I mean,
Right.
you know, there were dozens of witnesses that they had subpoenaed to come before Congress who said no. There were large piles of paperwork that they wanted, and people within the White House said no. It just goes on and on and on, but I would like to see them take a more aggressive posture. I very much would like to see that. So you know, we'll have to see how this plays out. Nancy, thank you for the call. Well said. Robert in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom. First time, long time, first time. So to touch on the you're welcome. To touch on the drop boxes for the ballot, there's a whole group of us out there, security officers. You know, we're trained to observe and report. Put us out there on these drop boxes, watching these drop boxes, securing them, make sure that, you know, vandalism cannot happen to them because we are trained to observe and report. And also to kind of help out with that, use this also for transportation. Transport those ballots from the drop boxes to where they need to go. You know, this is an idea I had, and your thoughts on it?
I doubt that most states are going to have the budget to hire 24/7 security for drop boxes, but I think that if you simply put, you know, Wi-Fi enabled cameras on all those drop boxes so that you could catch somebody in the act if they were trying to vandalize a drop box and then had pretty, you know, draconian penalties for doing so, that would be a great starting point. But you know, I get, Robert, that there's probably a lot of people like yourself who are former security officers who are out of work right now. You've got stores all over the country and malls and things that had security, you know, parts of the business sector that had security. You know, a lot of those people are probably available for hire. You know, I think it's a good idea. But I'm skeptical that it'll happen. But you know, thanks for putting it out there. I think it's good to start the conversation. Robert, thank you very much for the call, and thanks for watching us on Facebook Live down there in Fort Worth, Texas. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, defending America from the conservative weapons of mass deception. Stick around. We'll be right back. The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. And welcome back. Picking up your phone calls here, Robert in Forest Grove. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I think medical science will explain why we are in this pickle we are in the country with Trump and everything. Now, if you look at the human personality, there is a personality disorder called antisocial personality that have no conscience. Mm-hmm. 1 out of 100 males births are sociopathic. And if you extrapolate that to the population of the United States, there's 1 to 2 million sociopaths in circulation. In all
well, if it's 1%, it would be Yeah, half
well,
of 340
Robert
million.
here is the expert, Hare. He's the expert from British Columbia who's written and done most of the research. They found that these sociopaths actually have structural brain changes. Anyway, tying that in with
and they've
where
taken
we
over
are
the
right
Republican
now,
Party.
obviously, the major cause of where we're at right now is a psychopath named Rupert Murdoch. He has no conscience. As one man probably has done more damage in this century than I can think of anybody else. He created
his own son, James, basically just backed away from the business because of the way the Murdoch papers were telling lies about climate change in Australia during the wildfires that they had last summer.
Well, yeah, and Kevin Rudd wrote an article in the Sydney Morning Herald about that. It's called...
Yeah, it was titled, Rupert Murdoch is the cancer on Australian democracy. That was the headline for it.
Exactly, yeah. Well, that's what he is doing that here. He created...
Yeah. Well, Rudd points that out in his op-ed. He says, Murdoch did this to Australia, then he moved to the UK, and he did it to the UK, and then he moved to the United States, and now he's doing it to America.
And he created this dumbed-down electorate is all from Fox. People that are still avoiding inhaling the virus. Because
I am with you, Robert. I don't know that we can definitively diagnose Rupert Murdoch as a sociopath, but it is a common characteristic among very, very wealthy people. And and you look at his behavior, or you look at the causes he espouses, and it's very, very distressing. Robert, thank you for the call. Robert in Greenville, North Carolina, from Robert to Robert. Robert in Greenville, North Carolina, you're on the air.
Okay, Louis DeJoy, the head of the post office now, that's Donald Trump's large
Right,
donor.
the guy who gave Trump $2 million. Trump gave him a job.
Yeah, and he also has $75 million invested with competitors at the post office. His wife is up for an ambassador to Canada, and we're having a meeting on investigating all the claims that the people at the post office are saying what he's doing to slow it down. It's going to be September 18th. Why do we have to wait that long when, we need to, everybody's talking about...
Who's we who is doing the investigation on September 18th, Robert?
They're going to have Elizabeth Warren and a few other people are going to, they're trying to have, get them before...
Oh, you mean a congressional hearing?
Yes, I'm sorry. And
okay, well, if it's Elizabeth Warren, that would be in the Senate. Mitch McConnell controls the schedule and the calendar for the Senate, and the individual committees that would do the primary hearings are also all chaired by Republicans. So that may have something to do with it, Robert.
And even the Kodak thing, but this Louis DeJoy thing is I'm in North Carolina, and I can see our mail's affected already. So this Donald Trump, a lot of people are saying, boy, I hate the thought of Donald Trump for another 4 years. There's not going to be a do-over or a redo. If Donald Trump wins, it's Donald Trump forever. There's going to be one party, the Republican Party.
Yep, I agree.
That's what
I agree.
are.
This election is literally a battle for the soul of this country. Robert, thank you for your comments. Very well said. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey, you're on the air. Bill, we got about a minute to the end of the hour.
Okay, hi Tom. I wanted to bring to your attention this incredible article I read in the government-run magazine called Smithsonian Magazine, and it's an article June 24th of 2020. A brief history of anti-fascism. And it goes into real detail about how Antifa was a real organization in Germany. And that Winston Churchill had reached out to them to, be an underground ally of theirs. And, how...
and they called it Antifa in Germany?
Yeah. It was... let me see if I...
Bill, can you tweet that article at me?
Tweet it? I don't tweet, though.
Okay. All right.
June
well, I'll go looking for it. You said it's in the Smithsonian. It shouldn't be that hard to find.
June 24th. Yeah, it talks about the Anti-Fascistische Aktion, or Antifa for short. They fought Nazi anti-Semitism and homophobia. And so they were a real group, and they were on our side.
And this was in the Smithsonian Magazine.
Smithsonian, yeah, June 24, and it's by James Stout.
Okay, great. I'll be looking for it after I get off the air. Bill, thanks a lot for the tip. It's we're hitting the top of the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse
face, little 10-cent pieces of cloth to put on our face to protect us from a disease. And sure enough, you run the time out, and we have that problem. China is a problem, although it's important to understand that the core of the problem actually lies in the way Americans approach our political economy. It's this sort of allowing for monopolization, allowing for shareholder primacy. If you combine those two things, what you end up with are financiers offshoring the things that you need, either destroying them or offshoring them, which is sometimes the same thing. So it's at open markets, what we try to do is sort of distinguish between the Chinese who are playing the game as you would expect your foe to play the game, and the people at home who are like helping them play the game. And so what we can do actually, besides focusing on the Chinese, is also focusing on the folks here who are helping the Chinese.
Yeah. This whole neoliberal experiment that really started in a big way with the Reagan administration, and then, Reagan and Bush ultimately negotiating NAFTA and proposing, I think it got followed through toward the end of the Clinton administration or maybe early in Bush, of giving, most favored nation or permanent normal trade relations to China. This was sold to us, and I remember this very well back in the very late 80s, but mostly the early 90s, 91, 92, 93, 94. It was sold to us as something that would produce world peace. There were books about this. It was a subtext to Francis Fukuyama's, The End of History and the Last Man, or something like that. And it was basically that if we, as a nation, the United States, and this is how, of course, the European Union was sold to European countries, because they'd had two wars on the European continent, if we are all interdependent with each other for trade, for commerce, then we're less likely to ultimately hurt ourselves by screwing up that relationship by declaring war on somebody. And it makes a lot of sense at a certain level, but it seems to me that even though it was sold as this is a way to have peace in the world, what was really going on was that these giant corporations were using this as a smokescreen to basically find cheaper labor and to find places where they could manufacture things where they didn't have to comply with EPA rules about the environment. And the consideration of peace, world peace, was not even on the radar screen of these giant monopolistic corporations. They don't give a rat's ass about it, and that's where we're at now in the United States. What do you think of that analysis?
No, I think you're pretty much dead on. I mean, and the thing is that there is something to be said about interdependence equaling peace and mutual prosperity. I mean, that's we can cooperate. Cooperating with other nations is better than fighting with them. I mean, that's common sense. The problem, and this is going back to what happened with the WTO, with the Uruguay round of the GATT, which was passed in 1994, was negotiated by the Clinton administration. The problem is that the Uruguay round of the GATT basically opened the door, not just to big corporations, but to monopolization. Up to that point, we had a very interdependent relationship with the Japanese, with the Europeans. It led to exactly what you're talking about, peace and prosperity. It led to mutual cooperation. That's a good thing. But the Clinton people, they opened the door to monopoly, and then you jump ahead. Just within 5 or 6 years, suddenly you find all of these systems are monopolized at the global level. And that means that all of something really important, all the chemicals that we rely on for our drugs, suddenly they're in China. All of a certain kind of semiconductor, it's in Taiwan. All of a certain kind of component for electronics is in Korea. Now, that kind of hyper specialization. Some people say it's efficient. I don't think it is. It's actually very inefficient. But what it also does is it creates a system in which any kind of problem anywhere can lead to massive disruptions in the system. And it also gives to other countries, especially China, leverage over us. That is fantastically dangerous, and that is leading us to either some kind of a bad conflict that's going to be very damaging, or to some kind of a compromise that's going to be almost as damaging.
China controls the manufacture of the raw materials for 95% of all the pharmaceuticals consumed in the United States. About half of them, I guess, are manufactured in India from those raw materials made in China, and the other half are made in other places, many of them in China itself. Doesn't China have the ability right now to kill literally tens of millions of Americans simply by withholding these chemicals?
Absolutely, they can shut off the flow tomorrow. And this is,
so Trump has highlighted this. But it seems like he's not doing anything about it. You'd have to work with Congress to do something about this rather than just rave about it. We just have 30 seconds,
That's the thing
Barry.
about
What
the Trump
can we do?
administration is, the thing about the Trump administration is they often actually point their finger at the right thing. When they pointed their finger at this problem of concentration of APIs, these pharmaceutical ingredients in China. That's a big deal. It's a big problem. The Trumpies said, "Hey, there's a problem there. We're going to do something about it." The problem is they're so incoherent, they're so confused, and they're so into working all by themselves that they have failed to actually do anything about it. And so we actually need a radically different approach if we're going to do something about this fantastically dangerous situation.
I'm absolutely with you. I think that we need to go back to Alexander Hamilton's 1793 letter to Congress. 1791 it was. Anyhow, Barry C. Lynn, he's the director of the Open Markets Institute, openmarketsinstitute.org. Thank you, Barry.
Hey, thanks for having me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the True People's Media. And welcome back. Colleen in Moore Park, California. Hey, Colleen, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, I have a question that I haven't heard anybody else ask, and it is, why is it that those people running for the office of the presidency of the United States don't have to pass a security clearance?
I think the reason why is the same reason that we don't have a law requiring certain types of disclosures or, for example, a mental health exam or anything like that. And that is that, just to play this out, Colleen, imagine that what you are suggesting was actually the law, that Joe Biden would have to pass a security test before he could be certified as a candidate for the Democratic Party to run for president. And that security test, of course, would be executed by the executive branch of the current administration. It would be done by presumably the Justice Department or one of the security agencies, which are firmly in the control of Donald Trump. So Biden submits his paper for the security test. The Trump administration comes back and says, we think you're a security risk. You can't run for president. What do you do then?
I don't know. It seems to me
that's always the fatal flaw with requiring a candidate to do any particular thing is who is going to enforce the requirement. If you have a government that is sliding toward fascism, that requirement could allow them to keep out the most viable candidates and only allow in the weakest candidates. I mean, I love the idea, Colleen. I love your concern. I think that you are spot on that well, we know now, Donald Trump has been a security concern from the get-go. He's in bed with a whole bunch of oligarchs and autocrats all over the world, from, Mohammed bin Salman to Vladimir Putin to Modi, and pick your tyrant, right, or your wannabe strongman or actual strongman. But when we try to do things using the power of government, we have to be very, very careful because, government can be a very blunt instrument. Colleen, thank you for the call. Keep thinking, right? Keep thinking. I appreciate it. Brian in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
Hey, I've just been hearing about, the mail slowing down. And, I've heard that people, their mail-in ballots they have to fill out, they're not getting them on time, or they're really delayed, and then they go to mail them in, and then that's delayed, and they're not meeting the elections. I actually heard about someone who missed an election, even waiting a while. I've heard of a month delay, and I'd be interested in hearing your ideas, but I do have a suggestion I just wanted to air. Maybe suggest people only do the drop, where they walk in and drop off, but then have the backup plan if they can't do that to go in person. And I know it's not ideal with COVID, but we got to get Trump out of there.
Yeah, I agree. The problem that you're going to have, Brian, is that there's a number of states, with the exception of New York State, which is still requiring basically a doctor's slip, an excuse to get a mail-in ballot. All the other states that make it very, very hard to get an absentee ballot are red states. They're controlled by Republican governors and Republican secretaries of state. And, many of them are not setting up drop boxes, and they're not making it legal or possible for people to walk a ballot into a polling station. So, it gets real problematic. This is why we need national standards. This is why Congress passed H.R. 1 back in February of 2019. And it's also why Mitch McConnell refuses to take it up in the Senate, because it would fix this problem that you've identified, Brian. Brian, thanks for the call. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's pick up some phone calls here. And, we've laid a lot of stuff on the table here through the course of the day. And so I just wanted to check in with you guys and see what's on your mind. Dean in Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada. Hey, Dean, what's up? And forgive my mispronunciation of your town if I did.
No, that's fine. We're just up here in Canada. We're just kind of wondering why there's never any consequences for anybody in the government. And I guess what we're wondering is, the protest with George Floyd's killing was a success. So why don't Americans just stand up and just heavily protest what Donald's doing? Doesn't make sense to us.
If you look at country after country that has been taken over by an autocrat or is in the process of being taken over by an autocrat, whether it was Hungary 7 or 8 years ago, whether it was Poland just a few months ago, a few weeks ago, in fact, whether it was Russia a decade ago, whether it was, pick your country, right? Where a strongman government is coming into power and making protest and opposition a challenge. One of the things you find is that typically people don't go into the streets until it reaches the point where it's just way over the top. And usually that's too late. And that's one of my big concerns, Dean. You have touched on one of my very biggest concerns, is that the American people are going to wait until Donald Trump has consolidated power or has stolen the election. He is using the instruments of government right now to help him get himself reelected. No other president in the history of the United States has ever done this. It is illegal. It's a violation of the Hatch Act, among other things. But he's using the Justice Department to try to portray Joe Biden and his son as criminals. He's using the intelligence agencies to try to say that China is as big a risk to our elections as Russia, who's openly supporting Trump and actively involved in this. He's using the post office to try to slow down the mail, given that as many as half or 2/3 of all the ballots in this election will be coming through the mail. Pick your branch of government, right? He's using the Voice of America. He's politicized the Voice of America. He's doing all these things step by step. He's taken the Customs and Immigration Service and ICE and taken their police powers, their police agencies, and turned them into his own private Gestapo and used them to gas and beat peaceful protesters in Washington, D.C. and Portland, Oregon. All of these things, add up to authoritarianism writ large, add up to stealing an election right in front of us, right before our eyes. And once he's declared the winner, there's nothing we can do about it. And that's the end of America. That's what I'm looking at. And Dean, I don't have an easy answer other than trying to wake people the hell up, which is why I do this show every day and why I write the op-eds that I write that get published on American websites. Do you see anything I'm missing? And how are you guys in Canada dealing with your own right-wing movements? You've got right-wingers out in Canada who are, going up against Trudeau in ways that right-wingers here were going up against Obama.
It's my opinion. Like, Canada's just kind of we follow a lot of what America does. It seems like there's a lot of copycat type stuff, and I believe the same thing up here. Like, people, the more the right wing people are just, it's easy and they're grifters. The same as down there where you've got your like Matt Gaetz's and your Jim Jordans that, they're just causing problems for the sake of causing problems to enrich themselves, and it, and there's never any consequences. You look at Nunes and guys like that. Like, how are they still holding any power? Even at that
well, they're in the
level.
pocket of a billionaire or a number of billionaires, and those billionaires assure their reelection. And even if they lose their job, like Paul Ryan did, they will be caught with a million or multi-million-dollar a year safety net. There's a huge infrastructure that protects conservatives in this country. There's nothing like it for progressives in this country, sadly. Dean, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching us on YouTube there in British Columbia. I appreciate it. It's nice to hear from you. Hassan in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Hassan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I want to talk about the bullies question and an effort that we can undertake to at least take away one of the weapons that they may try to use in this presidential election. You had a caller yesterday who identified, I think it was 8 Senate races to try to flip to the Democratic column. He cited 270towin.com. And it's a site that I've been looking at for a different reason, and that's actually House races. And I wanted to offer 5 House races that if the Democrats win, they would have majority of representatives in a majority of states, and that would take away the 12th Amendment problem of having the Republicans control it if the election goes into the House of Representatives.
And the other big variable is if it goes to the House before or after January 3rd when the new House gets sworn in. But back to you. Finish your thought.
Well, it does go after because the House is sworn in on January 3rd. The electoral count happens on January 6th. It is in the Constitution, and that would be the new Congress that would get to do the counting.
Right.
And I can identify those 5 races for you if you'd like.
Go for it.
Okay, Alaska, which only has 1 representative, currently a Republican. Kansas's 2nd district, which Kansas currently has 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat. It would go to a 2-2 tie, which would at least take 1 away from the Republicans. Michigan's 3rd and 6th, and Montana's at large as well, 1 district there. By the way, Michigan is currently tied 7-7, so it would go from a tie to the Democratic majority.
To a majority. Hassan, thank you. That is really some really smart stuff, and thank you for the research on it. And I hope that anybody in any of those states that you mentioned their ears are perking up and they're doing something about it. Hassan, thank you, and thanks for listening to KTNF.
The Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations we'd really rather you didn't know all about.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms, in our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor. the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Health care is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Health care is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Health care is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of health care. I believe this health care is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
Hi, Thom Hartmann here. My new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. American monopolies dominate, control, and consume most of the energy of our entire economic system. They function the same as cancer does in a body. And like cancer, they weaken our systems while threatening to crash the entire body economic. American monopolies have also seized massive political power and use it to maintain their obscene profits and CEO salaries while crushing small competitors. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, quote, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series. Available where all fine books are. Carolina, how are you today? What's up? You're on the air.
Hey, Tom, thanks. Okay, so I signed a petition that's going around for the Board of Governors to remove Louis DeJoy. And what my question is to you is, do you think that this could be, is this a feasible way to get him out of office, to have him lose his office if we do a petition? And if so, then I wouldn't mind passing on the information of how to sign this petition.
Right. Jania, I don't know. My understanding is that the position was not one that was appointed or regulated by the Postal Board of Governors, but was appointed by the president, that was in the legislation that reinvented the post office back in the 70s, I think, when it was made a kind of standalone corporation that operated on its own rather than having money flow in and out from the government. So it may be that wouldn't have any effect. And I would also caution you about petitions, online petitions. A lot of these online petitions, and I have no idea if it's the case of the one that you're talking about, but there are people out there who are trying to figure out ways to harvest information that they can sell, that they can monetize, particularly email addresses, postal addresses, telephone numbers, and any identifying information, gender, age, economic status, racial status, any of that kind of stuff. And a lot of these petitions, particularly on the right wing, I've seen a bunch of these on the right, where they're clearly simply identity harvesting operations. And then they turn around and sell your information if you sign it. Sure, they may take the petition, they may submit the petition to somebody, but nobody pays that much attention to online petitions, first of all. And secondly, they may not even submit them. So I would be very cautious about that. But that said, I don't think the Board of Governors has the power to do that. I think it's going to require Donald Trump himself or Louis DeJoy to be shamed into resigning. And it appears that, he has no intention of doing that, and neither does Trump. So,
right.
Did I answer your question?
I was worried about that, too. Thank you so much. It's just that, you get tired of sitting around feeling like you're being complacent, So
I know. It's like, I want to do something.
Yeah.
Yes.
But thank you, Tom.
I totally get it. Thank you, Jania. I would say that, the more effective thing to do would be to call every single one of your elected representatives. You can call both your senators and your member of the House at 202-224-3121. Although calling their local offices in your state, which you can easily Google, is typically more effective. But if you want to call their federal office, 202-224-3121, and then, raising hell in social media to the extent that you can, I think that will probably be far more effective than signing any petitions right now. Catherine in Las Vegas. Hey, Catherine, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
Thanks. So when you were talking about the bullies versus the nerds, that's the perfect metaphor that you can both bring down and up for both the election and after. But the bully is actually corporate media, in that look at what they're doing as far as all the free media towards Trump, but then with the VP process, they've now framed it as Biden picks a black woman, or he's, if he does, it's because he's bullied. If he doesn't, it's because he's turned his back on black America. And either way, it has tainted the VP pick. And why does the corporate media care so much about the VP pick? Because they're scared to death of Elizabeth Warren. Because when you look at the economy as a whole and the fact that we're headed into a depression with every metric except for the 2-year mark, whoever structures the recovery is going to change the structure of our entire economy, whether it be wages, whether it be, income inequality, whether it be racial justice for the next 30 years. And because we've been consolidating all of this wealth during this last couple months of recession and 100,000 businesses shut down. So if they control the VP and they control the monetary policy for the recovery, then they further expand their stranglehold on government.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I think that and it's one of the reasons that I haven't been talking much about the VP pick, because I don't want to get into that kind of, trash talking, number one. Although I've made my preferences clear, but, I hope I'm not trash talking anybody. There's just a hell of a lot of lazy journalism going on, Catherine. I was this morning listening to NPR, and not just the local station, but this was the whole national thing. And the guy was reading the news, at the top or bottom of the hour, I forget which. And he said, President Trump has signed 4 executive orders, including one that would give $400 to every American who's unemployed. The Democrats are threatening to sue, saying it's unconstitutional. Well, talk about a pile of, a stinking pile of BS. Trump, number one, did not sign an executive order saying that everybody should get $400. That was actually a memorandum. Number two, it doesn't say everybody should get $400. It says everybody should get $300. Number three, that money is coming out of FEMA's $44 billion surplus right now, and it would be exhausted in less than 4 weeks if all the states took it. And whether the Democrats are going to say, no, you can't. I mean, the way that NPR presented it this morning, it was like Trump is trying to give you money, and the Democrats are upset about that, and they're going to try and stop it. Which is just a complete screaming, flaming lie. And, and these egregious, this level of egregious sloppiness that I'm seeing across the media, whether it's, the corporate media on TV and radio, or whether it's, NPR and my local newspaper for that matter, is really distressing. And I don't disagree with you that the media are playing the role of bullies to a large extent, and that this whole thing with the VP pick, we started out with, what's she going to look like and what does she wear? I mean, all this kind of sexist crap has been dumped on a lot of these women already. And, people criticizing Stacey Abrams' weight, for God's sake. I mean, it's like, when does this stop? No man has ever been criticized for this stuff. And
that's what the media chooses to talk about instead of discussions about whose policy is the best to get us out of the recession, whose policy is the best for Black America, whose policy is the best for the pandemic. And instead, the media, while saying women are treated differently, are focusing exclusively on race, appearance, ambition, etc.
Right. And ambition is just code for uppity woman, which is more misogyny. I mean, it is just so wrong. I don't know how to say it beyond that. But, thank you for the call, Catherine. Spot on. And very well said. Alan in Staten Island, New York. Hey, Alan, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for the call. I looked up online, and I'm sure, or in a book, and I'm sure you know everyone. common signs of psychopathy, common signs of sociopathy, narcissistic sociopath. There are 19 in there. He fits every one of those. Yet you can't tell that to a supporter. They don't want to hear this. But it's very simple to read these things and just put him in that category. And if you ever, from past elections, this man's running Republican, Democrat. All right, I didn't like Republican normally, but if he wins, I didn't go crazy. This is a whole different situation that I think many people have to be instructed on thinking a little bit.
And here's the thing that we need to be remembering going forward, Alan. Most high-functioning sociopaths, and they're overrepresented in certain categories, CEOs, police officers. I mean, there's a couple of salespeople. There's a couple of categories where high-functioning sociopaths actually do well. Most high-functioning sociopaths are smart enough to know how to pretend that they're not sociopaths. They can fake empathy. They can pretend that they care. They know that it's appropriate to do that. They know what to say and do, even if they don't actually feel it. Donald Trump is not smart enough to do that. But Tom Cotton is. There's no shortage, among others, there's no shortage of Republican people that I believe are sociopaths or show those characteristics who in public office are able to conceal that or hide it or overwhelm any analysis of it with other stuff. And that, I'm really worried about 2024.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Because what Donald Trump has done is he has shown any future Republican sociopath exactly how to deconstruct America, how to destroy this republic. And welcome back. Lon in Pleasanton, California. Hey, Lon, what's on your mind today? Lon? No Lon. Let's try Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, we've talked a number of times before, but I was talking to one of your representatives, and I think the key date in the last decade was April 20th of 2011 when Seth Meyers and Obama went after Trump for that correspondence dinner.
I was there.
Did you ever see that? You were.
I was in the room.
I think that's really a significant date because you see right after that he started his hyperactive lunacy to get Obama out of there. And talking about the media, a prime example is he's having his daily briefings, which are absolute lunacy. But all it is it's free campaign for him, and the taxpayers are paying for it. Yesterday, the classic example is when he said that they could possibly have the vaccine by November 3rd. You know why he said that? Because so his homophobic, racist, misogynistic base can go, see, honey, we'll vote for him on November 3rd and we'll go get our shot, too. You see what I mean? That's the mentality in this country. That's what's happening. Because bad news sells, overall. That's what the media is involved in. They don't, they say, tune in at 7 and we'll tell you how you're all going to die tomorrow. Oh, and by the way, probably some peanut butter and Viagra in the meantime. You see what I mean? That's how the world works. It's scary
and
stuff.
These guys in the Trump campaign actually, I was going to say actually believe their supporters are this stupid, but it must go beyond belief because they've been doing this for several years now, so it must actually work. I'm getting emails. I've gotten 3 emails in the last week that specifically said, and one was from Eric Trump, one was from Eric Trump's wife, and the one I got today was from Brad Parscale or somebody, some campaign official, saying President Trump picked your name out, Fred, from all his entire list of donors to say you're one of his top donors and he would like your advice. Will you please fill out this survey, or will you please, or would you please contribute $50 to get a plaque as one of the top 100 contributors to the Trump campaign, or whatever it may be. These highly personalized emails that assume that I'm stupid enough to believe that Donald Trump is sitting around looking over his donor list and going, oh, Fred Flintstone, or oh, Thom Hartmann, that guy is my guy. I want to have, another one of them was, Donald Trump told me that he would like to have dinner with you. Would you please, make a $35 contribution to put your name in the running for, in other words, to enter the contest, basically. And as we know from Judd Legum's reporting, nobody ever wins these contests. Donald Trump hasn't had dinner with anybody. But they still, they're still doing it. They've got one going for New York next week. And it's just like they are just screaming to the world that Trump supporters are stupid, that they're low IQ people who don't understand what a con, how a con runs. And I just find it astonishing, Tim.
Yeah, it's amazing because what you have to understand is, you look at regional variations in this country. I have friends, I've traveled the country, I have friends all over. We're not a united country. We never really have been. If you look at, educational backgrounds, military background, economics, and so forth. My parents came from Nebraska. You have people that are literally lived 4, 5, 6 generations, and their mentality has not changed. You see what I mean? And those are the people that are going to vote for that SOB. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely get it. Tim, thanks for the call. What is just, it saddens me, frankly, that the Trump campaign is so certain that their supporters are so stupid. We'll be right back. The hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment tells how the Second Amendment was written to protect Georgia's slave patrols. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Bill in Washington, D.C. Bill, it says you've got a correction for me. What's that?
I hate to call it a correction, but it's called the rule of threes. Right. You were talking earlier about how the administration is basically trying to starve people. And so it's called the rule of threes. 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food.
Really? I'd never heard that.
And
that sounds
these
credible.
are deadlines for literally deadlines.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm guessing the 3 hours without shelter means that if you're in, like in a heat wave or it's really, really cold out, if you're in extreme weather.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Bill, I'm always willing to learn. Thank you. That was fascinating.
Yes.
I appreciate the call. Thank you very much. Michelle in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Michelle, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, when you think about the quagmire that Trump would be in if he was not reelected, all the legal stuff that's against him and everything else, sexual stuff, he cannot afford to be the loser. And I am absolutely pessimistic about the Democrats winning. But when Trump sees that he's going to lose, he's going to take his millions and put them in a suitcase, and he's going to figure out some country that will take him in. It might be Saudis or South America somewhere. And he's going to claim that he committed suicide. Somehow he's going to disappear because he cannot afford to lose. You know this, right?
I don't think so.
I
think he can actually, Michelle.
There's a thing. Hitler did that, but that's what Trump has to do.
Yeah, he's had over 3,000 lawsuits against him for not paying bills and things. Right now, you've got cities all over America to which the Trump campaign owes millions of dollars for security. He's stiffing them. He's not paying the police. He claims he loves the police, but he's screwing the police financially in town after town after town. I think that he thinks that he can simply litigate things forever, because that's what he's done for the last 60 years. He can simply, if he leaves office and starts his own television network or buys One American News or something like that, and becomes a media star, that as this stuff. But it's starting to get real. E. Jean Carroll is a credible journalist and writer, and nobody has ever accused her of being any kind of a nutcase or anything. And 20 years ago, he raped her in a fitting room at it wasn't Macy's, it was one of the high-end stores in Washington, D.C., or in New York City, excuse me. And she kept the dress with his semen on it after he raped her. And she now has sued him for defamation because he called her a liar. And the court yesterday afternoon, the court said, Trump, you have to provide DNA to be examined and compared with the DNA from that dress that E. Jean Carroll has. And, again, I'm absolutely certain that he will refuse to do that, and he'll say, sue me. And, it was just a lower court that said this. It was a federal court, but it was a lower court. And he's going to try and take it up to the Supreme Court, and that's a year-long process. And he's just going to drag this stuff out as much as he can. But, whether the walls are actually closing in or not, Michelle, I'm skeptical. And I think Trump is very skeptical. He believes in his own infallibility and immortality. So it's going to be a tough one. But I get your point. I absolutely get your point. I think it's one of the reasons why he's struggling so hard. I think it's one of the reasons why his kids are struggling so hard, too, to keep him in the White House, because they know that the gravy train will end, when he's out of the White House, or they believe it may end. And they may be subject to prosecution. Don Jr. and Ivanka almost got prosecuted for stuff around the building that he had in Soho, where they were making false claims to people. They were committing real estate fraud and bank fraud, or at least that was the allegation. And that stuff might come back to haunt them, although probably a lot of it is beyond the statute of limitations.
What's going to stop him from packing a suitcase and going to Saudis?
Well, nothing, and I would say good riddance if that's what happens. I have no problem with that. And his wife and his son have dual citizenship with Slovenia, so he may end up there. God only knows. Although I'm guessing that they're going to try to escape him rather than just America. Michelle, thank you for the call. Ray in Astoria. Hey, Ray, what's on your mind? We got about a minute here to the end of the show.
Hi, Tom. Is there a way that our state's attorney, Oregon, or other states together maybe could sue LaJoy for interfering with our right to vote by messing with the mail service?
Yeah, anybody can sue for anything, broadly speaking. The question is, will that lawsuit be successful? Any lawsuits brought right now against the executive branch, and DeJoy is part of the executive branch, they will have to go through 3 levels of courts before they get, or 2 levels of courts before they get to the Supreme Court, the 3rd level. And that's going to take 6 months to a year, and we are not 6 months to a year out from the election. So I am not optimistic that is a path that we can or should follow. Ray, thank you for the call. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, with, I believe, Congressman Mark Pocan. Typically, he's with us the first hour of the show, taking your calls for the hour. And, more of the ongoing drama of life in America during a pandemic with a madman in the White House. It's mind-boggling, but here we are. We're living in one of the most historic times in history. So get out there, get active, tag. You're it. And be good to yourself and the people around you. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code Tom.